They called her a confused old woman and planned to lock her away before murdering her son for his inheritance. But they forgot one thing. She was a homicide detective, and their perfect home was her crime scene. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The first crack in the perfect facade of my son's life appeared not with a bang, but with a whisper of condescension in a room full of million-dollar art. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the air in Serena's gallery was crisp and sterile, smelling faintly of champagne and old money. My son Mark stood beside me, his hand resting on my arm, but his grip felt loose, his eyes unfocused. He was a giant in the world of architecture, a man who built monuments of glass and steel, yet here, in his own wife's world, he seemed like a ghost. And this piece, Serena was saying, her voice a smooth, honeyed melody that wrapped around her guests, explores the fragility of memory. She gestured to a chaotic splash of black paint on a white canvas. She was breathtaking, as always, dressed in a stark white dress that made her look like a marble statue come to life. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, found mine. Evie, you appreciate that, don't you? How memories can shift. Before I could answer, I felt a slight tremor in Mark's hand. I looked up at him. His brow was furrowed in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy struggling with algebra. Mom, did you take your afternoon pills? He murmured, his voice thick and low, just for me. My blood went cold. I took them with lunch, honey. Serena gave them to me herself. He blinked slowly, as if the thought were a difficult thing to process. Oh, right. Serena's smile never faltered, but her eyes sharpened. She glided over to us, a predator in silk. Everything all right, darling? She asked Mark, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his cheek. Then she looked at me, her gaze dripping with a sweet, cloying pity. Evie, dear, are you feeling confused again? Mark, maybe we should get your mother home. The excitement might be too much for her. Mark's partner, a sharp man named David, looked on with an expression of polite concern. The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I wasn't confused. I was 67, a retired homicide detective from a major Midwest city's police force, and my mind, despite a recent heart scare, was as sharp as a shard of glass. But in the 3 weeks since I'd been recovering in my son's home, I was being told, with the most loving of intentions, that it was beginning to fail. I'm perfectly fine, I said, my voice firmer than I intended. Serena's smile tightened. Of course you are. She turned back to her audience, dismissing me as gently as one would a child. Mark's hand slipped from my arm. He looked lost, adrift in a fog I couldn't penetrate. That was the real problem. My son, my brilliant, kind-hearted Mark, was not himself. He'd misplace his phone, only to have Serena find it in his pocket. He'd trail off mid-sentence, and she'd finish it for him with a sad, knowing look. It's the stress, she'd explain to anyone who'd listen. He's working so hard and worrying about his mother. The doctor gave him some natural herbs to help him cope. She administered those herbs herself in a special tea she brewed for both of us every single night. A fragrant, cloying concoction she claimed had calming properties. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie, but I didn't know how to prove it. I was a guest in their home, a patient in their care, and my concerns were being dismissed as symptoms of my own decline. The house itself, a masterpiece of modern architecture in an exclusive suburb, felt less like a home and more like a high-tech asylum, a gilded cage. That night, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my guest suite. The tea Serena had given me sat heavy in my stomach, making my thoughts feel thick and syrupy, my mind a car stuck in mud. Sleep? was impossible. At 3:00 a.m., I gave up. I slipped out of bed, my old detective's habit of moving in silence serving me well. The house was dark, lit only by the pale, digital glow of smart hubs embedded in the walls. As I padded down the long marble hallway towards the kitchen, I saw it. A thin sliver of light from under the den door at the far end of the house. A voice. A hushed, urgent whisper. It was Serena. My first thought was a late-night call with a European client for her gallery. But the tone was wrong. It was cold, clinical, stripped of all its usual sweetness. The detective in me, the part of me they were trying to smother, took over. I crept closer, my bare feet making no sound on the cold stone. I pressed my ear to the heavy, soundproofed door. "No, Leo, the dosage is perfect," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "I've been gradually increasing it for both of them. The meds are making her confused, just like the specialist said they would. She barely questioned it when I told her she'd forgotten a doctor's appointment last week, an appointment that never existed." My blood turned to ice. She was talking about me. A low male voice. Leo murmured on the other end, too faint to make out the words. Serena laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound, completely devoid of humor. "Don't worry about your cut. It's all going according to plan. I've been prepping Mark's partners for months, telling them how worried I am about his mental state, his breakdowns from the stress of taking care of his ailing mother." A wave of nausea washed over me. I braced myself against the wall. "I've got the committal paperwork for Evie all ready," she continued, her voice dropping to an icy, conspiratorial whisper. "Tomorrow, I'll get her committed. The doctors at the facility will see exactly what I've told them to see, a paranoid old woman who has tragically lost her mind." I clapped a hand over my mouth, stifling a gasp. This couldn't be real. Then came the final devastating blow. "And once his mother is securely tucked away and legally discredited," she hissed, "then I just need to get rid of my husband, and all that money is ours. A tragic accident. A grieving widow who lost her mother-in-law and her husband in the same month. No one will ever suspect a thing." I recoiled from the door as if I'd been struck. The gilded cage wasn't a prison. It was a death trap, and I was scheduled to be the first to go. The world tilted and spun. I stumbled back into the darkness of the hallway, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle the scream, clawing its way up my throat. Get rid of my husband. The words echoed in the silent, cavernous house, a death sentence pronounced as calmly as a dinner order. For a long, terrifying moment, I was just a mother, a 67-year-old woman, trapped and terrified. My son was sleeping down the hall next to a monster who was patiently poisoning him. My first instinct was primal. Run. Burst into his room, shake him awake, scream the terrible truth until he understood. But as I made it back to my room, the lingering fog from Serena's nightly tea began to recede, burned away by a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. Through the panic, another part of me stirred, a part that had been dormant for years, buried under the soft blanket of retirement. Detective Evie Reed, Homicide Division. And she was not helpless. She was methodical, and she was royally pissed off. The fear didn't vanish, but it crystallized into a hard, sharp point of focus. The trembling in my hands stopped. My breathing, ragged and shallow, deepened into a slow, steady rhythm. I was no longer a victim. I was an investigator, and this house was my crime scene. I began to pace, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. "Okay, Reed," I thought, slipping back into the familiar cadence of a case assessment. What do we know? What do we need? What I knew, Serena was actively drugging both me and Mark. She had an accomplice named Leo. She had fabricated a medical history to support her claim that I was senile. She planned to have me involuntarily committed tomorrow. After that, She would murder my son. What I needed? Irrefutable proof. My word against hers was less than useless. She had spent weeks, maybe months, crafting a narrative of my decline and Mark's instability. Any accusation I made would be twisted into the final piece of evidence against me. I needed something a jury could see, something a lawyer couldn't spin. The timeline was a razor's edge. I had until sometime tomorrow before they came for me. Once I was in their system, my credibility would be zero. I would be a voice screaming from a padded room, and Mark's fate would be sealed. My cell phone was a liability. I had no doubt she monitored it. I was cut off, isolated in this high-tech fortress my son had built. And in that thought, a new one sparked. The fortress itself was my only weapon. Mark had been so proud of his creation. "It's the safest house in Oakhaven, Mom," he'd boasted. "Everything is integrated." A plan began to form, audacious and risky. I couldn't outmuscle Serena. I couldn't outrun her, but I could outthink her. She believed I was a confused old woman. That was her greatest mistake, and it was my greatest advantage. My first move had to be recon. I needed to find the source of the drugs, the actual chemical she was using. My best guess was her special calming tea. If I could get a sample of the raw ingredients, I could have it analyzed. I had to wait. The hours until dawn crawled by. At 6:02 a.m., I heard the whisper-quiet hum of Serena's Tesla, pulling out of the driveway for her daily yoga run. A 90-minute window I now knew was likely a meeting with Leo. The moment she was gone, I moved. Mark was still in a deep, unnatural sleep. I checked on him first, my heart aching at the sight of his pale, slack face. He was sedated. A quiet rage burned in my chest. I left him and went straight to the kitchen. The kitchen was a minimalist landscape of white quartz and stainless steel. I went to the pantry, a walk-in affair with shelves organized with terrifying precision. I scanned for anything that looked like herbal tea. I found a canister labeled Serena's Evening Blend. It smelled sweet and floral, with a faint, almost medicinal undertone. This had to be it. I scooped a small amount into a plastic baggie I'd taken from my suitcase. As I sealed the bag, I heard a soft chime. I froze. It was the sound of the front door. My heart leapt into my throat. She wasn't supposed to be back for another hour. I shoved the baggie into the pocket of my robe and spun around just as Serena walked into the kitchen. She wasn't in her yoga clothes. She was in a chic business suit, holding her car keys. She stopped dead, her eyes locking onto mine, then flicking to the open pantry. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. "Evie, what are you doing up so early?" My mind raced, searching for a plausible lie. I couldn't sleep. I thought maybe some of that nice tea would help. Her smile widened. It didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you poor dear. You know you're not supposed to make that yourself. The dosage has to be precise." She glided towards me, her movements impossibly graceful. "I just forgot a file for a meeting." "Lucky I came back, wasn't it?" She walked past me into the pantry, her shoulder brushing mine. She picked up the canister. "Let me make you a cup before I go." "No, that's all right," I said, my voice tight. "I'm not thirsty anymore." "Nonsense." She turned, holding the canister, her eyes like chips of ice. "We have to take care of you." She was blocking my exit, her presence filling the small space. It wasn't a question. It was a threat. She knew. She didn't know what I knew, but she suspected something. She was testing me, pushing me. The baggie in my pocket felt like it was on fire. I had my first piece of potential evidence, but I was trapped. She was watching my every move, her perfect face a mask of loving concern that didn't hide the cold calculation beneath. I had made my first move, and she had countered it perfectly. Now I was on the defensive, In my own son's kitchen, with a woman who wanted me locked away. She had just shown me how hard this was going to be. The air in the kitchen was thick with unspoken menace. Serena stood there, a goddess of domesticity holding a canister of poisoned tea, her smile a perfect, terrifying mask. I was a cornered animal, and she knew it. "You look pale, Evie," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You should sit down. I'll bring your tea to you in the living room." My mind was screaming, "Get out! Get away from her." But my body was a 67-year-old machine that had recently been through a cardiac event, and she was standing between me and the hallway. I had no choice but to retreat to the living room, the baggie of herbs burning a hole in my pocket. Every instinct told me not to drink whatever she brought me, but refusing would be an open declaration of war. She returned a few minutes later with a steaming mug on a small tray. The floral scent was overpowering. She placed it on the table in front of me. "There you are. Drink it all up. It'll help you relax." Her eyes bored into me, daring me to refuse. I had to play the part. The confused, frail old woman. I picked up the mug, my hand trembling slightly, a tremor that was only half fake. I brought it to my lips and took the smallest possible sip, the warm liquid coating my tongue. I held it in my mouth, then swallowed, the taste cloying and strange. "Good girl," she cooed, as if to a toddler. She glanced at her watch. "I really must run. You rest now. We have a busy day." The moment she was gone, I bolted for the guest bathroom and spat the tea into the sink, rinsing my mouth again and again until the taste was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. She was toying with me. She was enjoying this. I knew I couldn't stay in the house. I was a prisoner, under constant surveillance. The baggie of herbs was useless if I couldn't get it to a lab, and I couldn't do that from inside this cage. I needed to get out, even for an hour. I needed a weapon she didn't know about. An idea sparked. There was a small, independent electronics store in the village center, the kind of place that sold prepaid burner phones, no questions asked. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. I had to create a reason to leave. Later that morning, I found Mark in his study, staring blankly at a set of blueprints. The fog was thick around him today. "Mark, honey," I began, my voice pitched to sound wistful and a little melancholy. "I was just thinking about my old friend, Clara. She lives just a few towns over. I haven't seen her in ages. Do you think we could go visit her this afternoon?" He looked up, his eyes struggling to focus. "Clara? Sure, Mom. I guess so." It was too easy. My hope surged, but it was premature. Serena floated into the room, having overheard everything. "What a wonderful idea, Evie," she chirped. "You've been cooped up for so long. But Mark has that deadline, remember, darling. He can't possibly get away. Don't you worry. I'll take you." My heart sank. A trip with Serena was not a trip to freedom. It was a transfer from one cell to another. But I had no choice but to agree. The drive was a nightmare of polite, suffocating chatter. Serena pointed out landmarks, talked about the art market, and asked me questions about my health in a voice loud enough for the car's integrated system to potentially hear. Every word was a performance. As we neared the town where Clara supposedly lived, I feigned a sudden coughing fit. "Oh dear," I gasped, pressing a hand to my chest. "My throat is so dry. Could we possibly stop for a bottle of water?" I pointed to a small shopping plaza up ahead. "There's a drugstore there." The plaza also contained the electronics store. Serena's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, but she pulled in. "Of course. I'll run in and get it for you." "No, no," I insisted, opening my door. "The walk will do me good. Fresh air." I could see her debating, but refusing would look suspicious. "All right," she said, her voice tight. "But don't be long." My legs felt unsteady as I walked toward the drugstore. My heart was pounding. This was it, my one chance. Inside, I grabbed a bottle of water, then looked for a back entrance. There wasn't one, but the drugstore connected to a small corridor that led to the other shops in the plaza. The electronics store was at the other end. I paid for the water and told the cashier I was just going to use the restroom down the hall. My reflection in the store window was a stranger, a pale, frightened old woman. I took a deep breath. "You are Detective Reed," I told myself. "Move." The electronics store was dim and smelled of ozone and dust. An unkempt man with a ponytail sat behind the counter. "I need a prepaid phone," I said, my voice low. "Cash, the simplest one you have." He barely looked up, sliding a small box across the counter. $50. Comes with an hour of time. I paid with the cash I'd tucked into my shoe that morning. Back in the corridor, I fumbled with the packaging, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. I got the battery in and powered it on. The screen glowed with a beautiful anonymous light. I walked back into the drugstore, just as Serena was coming through the front door, her face a mask of impatience. "There you are. I was about to come looking for you." "Just got turned around," I mumbled, holding up the water. Back in the car, the burner phone felt like a small, dense star in my pocket, radiating a tiny spark of hope. That night, locked in my bathroom with the shower running to cover any sound, I made the call. I dialed the number I knew by heart, the direct line to my old partner, now a high-ranking detective in her own right, Maya Cruz, my one lifeline. The phone rang twice. Her voice, gruff and familiar, came on the line. "Cruz." "Maya, it's Evie," I whispered, my voice cracking with relief. "Evie? What the hell? I thought you were in... Where are you? Are you okay?" "No," I choked out. "I'm not okay. I'm in trouble. My son is in trouble." I started to explain, the words tumbling out in a rushed, terrified whisper. I told her about Serena, the gaslighting, the tea. "Slow down, Evie," Maya said. "Where are you? I'll send a car." "You can't," I said frantically. "She watches everything. They'll see a police car." I took a breath, about to tell her about the overheard murder plot, when I heard it. A soft click. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone in horror. The screen read, "Call failed." I tried to redial. No signal. I moved around the small bathroom. Nothing. The signal was gone. It wasn't a dropped call. The phone had been working perfectly just a second ago. I looked up at the ceiling, at the small, sleek smoke detector. It was new, state-of-the-art, just like everything else in this house. A smart smoke detector. Could it also be a signal jammer? Something she could activate remotely? It was insane. It was paranoid. It was exactly what she would do. My small spark of hope was extinguished. I had a phone, but it was useless. I had a witness, but I couldn't reach her. Serena hadn't just countered my move. She had anticipated it. She was 2 steps ahead, and the walls of the cage were closing in, thicker and more impenetrable than ever. The dead silence on the burner phone was more terrifying than a scream. It confirmed a horrifying suspicion. The gilded cage wasn't just smart. It was weaponized. Serena had the power to cut me off from the world with the flip of a switch. My one lifeline to Maya was gone, and now Serena knew I had tried to make contact. She wouldn't say anything, of course. That wasn't her style. She would just watch, her smile a little tighter, her loving care a little more suffocating, as she tightened the noose. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. My plan to get the herbs analyzed was a dead end. My attempt to call for help had failed. I needed a new strategy. I needed hard physical evidence, something more concrete than a baggie of potpourri, something that directly linked Serena to a crime. My training kicked in. When you can't find a weapon, you search the suspect's inner sanctum. I had to get into her bedroom, into her space, and find what she was hiding. The risk was enormous. If I was caught, it would be the final, irrefutable proof of my paranoia. It would be the express ticket to the asylum she had waiting for me. The opportunity came 2 days later. Serena was hosting a charity luncheon at the house. A parade of wealthy, beautifully dressed women would be arriving around noon. All of them witnesses Serena had been cultivating for months, feeding them stories of my tragic decline and Mark's stress-induced breakdowns. But for the hour before they arrived, she would be completely consumed with the caterers and florists, transforming the house into a stage for her performance. That was my window. 90 minutes max. Mark was in his home office, sedated and compliant as always. I could hear the murmur of the caterers in the kitchen and the main living areas. The master suite, at the far end of the house, would be empty. My heart pounded a deafening rhythm against my ribs as I slipped down the hallway. My socked feet made no sound on the polished marble. The door to the master suite was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and slid inside, my breath catching in my chest. The room was as cold and impersonal as a 5-star hotel suite. A minimalist landscape of gray, white, and chrome. There was no clutter, no sign of the vibrant, messy business of life. It was the curated space of a sociopath. A professional search is not a frantic rummaging. It is a methodical, grid-based sweep. I started with Serena's side of the bed. The nightstand drawers contained nothing but expensive skin creams, a silk sleep mask, and a book on art history. Her closet was a temple of designer clothes, each item spaced exactly 1 inch apart. I patted down the pockets of her blazers and coats. Nothing. My pulse was a frantic drum against the silence. Time was ticking. I could hear the faint sound of laughter from the front of the house. They were arriving. I moved to her vanity. It was an altar of beauty, covered in a sea of expensive cosmetics and jewelry boxes. The largest was a heavy, lacquered box, inlaid with mother of pearl. It was filled with diamonds and gold, a glittering testament to my son's generosity. But I wasn't looking for jewels. I was looking for a lie. I lifted the top tray, my fingers brushing against cold gems. I ran my other hand along the velvet lining of the box's interior, feeling for any inconsistency, any hidden compartment. And then I found it. A slight give in the bottom panel. A false bottom. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled at the edge. I couldn't get a grip. I looked around desperately, my eyes landing on a pair of tweezers on the vanity. I slid the fine metal tip under the edge of the panel and gently pried it up, and there it was. My first piece of truly hard evidence. It wasn't a bag of illicit drugs or a vial of poison. It was something far more insidious because it was cloaked in the legitimacy of modern medicine. It was a standard, pharmacy-issued prescription bottle. The label was pristine. The name on it was not Serena's or Mark's. It was a name I didn't recognize. But the name of the drug sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. Olanzapine. I knew the drug from my old police cases, a powerful antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. But off-label, in small sustained doses, it had a different effect. It caused profound drowsiness, confusion, weight gain, and a flat, emotionless affect. It was a chemical straitjacket. It would, to any outside observer, perfectly mimic a severe depressive episode or the onset of dementia. This was her weapon. This was the tool she was using to dismantle the minds of my son and me. The prescribing doctor was a Dr. Evan Cole, a name I'd never heard Mark mention. My hands shook as I pulled out the burner phone. I snapped several clear, high-resolution photographs of the bottle, making sure the name of the drug, the doctor, and the patient name were all crystal clear. This was it. This was the proof. This was the artifact that could change everything. I carefully replaced the bottle, closed the false bottom, and arranged the jewelry exactly as I had found it. I wiped the tweezers and the box with the edge of my sleeve, erasing any trace of my presence. She would never know I had been there. I slipped out of the bedroom, my heart soaring with a grim, triumphant victory. I had the evidence. Now I just had to get it to my son. I had to break through the fog and make him see the truth. I found him in the living room, a polite, vacant smile on his face as he greeted Serena's friends. I waited until there was a lull in the conversation. I drew him aside, into the relative privacy of the hallway. "Mark," I whispered, my voice urgent. "We need to talk. Now. It's about Serena." He blinked, his vacant smile faltering. "Mom, what is it? Can it wait?" "No." I pulled out the burner phone and shielded the screen with my hand. "You need to see this." I showed him the picture of the prescription bottle. "Do you know what this is, honey? It's a powerful antipsychotic. She's been putting it in our tea. That's why you can't think straight. That's why you're so tired all the time. She's poisoning us." He stared at the screen, his brow furrowed. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a flicker of clarity in his eyes, a glimmer of the old Mark. I thought I had reached him. Then his expression hardened. A dull, defensive mask slipped into place. He pushed the phone away. "Stop it, Mom," he said, his voice low and angry. A voice I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. "Just stop it. What is wrong with you? Taking pictures in our bedroom? Making up these crazy stories?" "It's not a story, Mark. It's the truth. The truth is that you're not well," he shot back, his words a gut punch. "Serena told me this might happen, that you might get paranoid, that you might start making accusations. She's just trying to take care of us, and you're trying to tear her down." He wouldn't look at me. He was reciting a script, a catechism of lies that Serena had drilled into his chemically clouded mind. "I'm going back to our guests," he said, his voice cold, "and you're going to be polite. Don't cause a scene. Don't make this any harder than it already is." He turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the hallway, the damning photograph glowing on the screen of my phone. It was the most profound defeat of my life. I had the weapon, but my own son, the person I was fighting for, had just turned it against me. The evidence was worthless if the victim wouldn't believe it. Serena had done more than just drug him. She had turned him into her soldier, and he was now guarding the walls of the cage from the inside. I was completely and utterly alone. The world went gray at the edges. Mark's words echoed in the marble hallway, colder and sharper than any insult a suspect had ever hurled at me. "The truth is that you're not well." He hadn't just dismissed the evidence. He had condemned me with it. Serena hadn't just built a cage. She'd convinced the other prisoner to help lock the door. I retreated to my room, the sound of tinkling laughter from the luncheon, a cruel mockery of the desolation in my heart. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the burner phone feeling heavy and useless in my hand. For a long, bleak hour, I let the despair wash over me. She had won. She had anticipated every move, twisted every truth, and poisoned my own son's love for me. The committal papers she'd mentioned were no longer a threat. They were an inevitability. I was a paranoid old woman with a photograph. It was my word against the world she had so perfectly constructed. I looked around the room. The minimalist furniture, the automated blinds, the silent watching smart hub on the wall. It was a prison designed by the very person I was trying to save. And that's when the spark returned. Not a gentle spark of hope, but a hard, angry spark of a detective who'd been backed into a corner. "It's the safest house in Oak Haven, Mom," Mark had boasted. "Everything is integrated. security, climate, media. I can control the entire house from my phone. He could control it, which meant the master control system was here, in the house. A new plan began to form, born not of hope, but of cold, calculated fury. If I couldn't get my evidence out, I would have to create new evidence inside. If no one would listen to my voice, I would make Serena herself confess. I would turn her greatest weapon, this house, against her. I would make this gilded cage sing. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. It relied on psychology, technology, and a lifetime of reading liars. I had to get access to the home's central control panel, which I knew was in Mark's office. I had to do it without being seen, and I had to do it soon. My chance came that evening. After the luncheon guests had departed, Serena announced she was going to a yoga class to de-stress. It was a lie, another probable meeting with Leo, but it was the opening I needed. Mark, exhausted and irritable after my earlier confrontation, had retreated to their bedroom with a headache, undoubtedly helped along by another dose of Serena's herbs. The house fell silent. I gave it 10 minutes, then moved. Mark's office was at the end of the hall, its glass walls offering no place to hide. I slipped inside, closing the heavy door behind me. The room smelled of leather and my son's cologne, a scent that tore at my heart. On the wall was the master control, a large, sleek touchscreen tablet. I powered it on. The screen lit up with a welcome message and a request for a password. My heart sank. Of course, it was password protected. I tried the obvious ones, their anniversary, Serena's birthday, the name of her gallery. Access denied, access denied, access denied. With each failure, a cold dread crept in. I had one more chance before it would lock me out. I closed my eyes, trying to think like my son. The real Mark, not the fog-shrouded stranger he'd become. What was most important to him? What was at the core of his soul? It wasn't Serena. It was his work, his passion, and his history. His father, my late husband, had been a carpenter. He taught Mark how to build, how to see the beauty in structure and form. My husband's name was Samuel. His birthday was April 12th. My fingers trembled as I typed it in. MSANMUEL 1 2. Access granted. Tears pricked my eyes, a mix of grief for my lost husband and a fierce, burning love for the son who still remembered him. I pushed the feeling down. I was on the clock. I navigated through the menus, my detective's mind quickly deciphering the user interface. Security, audio, visual, automation. It was all there. I found the integrated surveillance system. The cameras were mostly external, as Mark had said, but the system had high-fidelity microphones and discrete cameras built into the smart hubs in every major room. They were designed for convenience, for voice commands. I was about to turn them into instruments of justice. I created a new custom automation routine, a sequence of commands that would be triggered by a specific, unique voice phrase. A phrase that would sound perfectly natural in conversation, but one only I would know to use. A phrase that would activate the audio and video recording in the kitchen, save the file under a hidden name, and, this was the crucial part, upload it simultaneously to a secure off-site cloud server. It would be instantly accessible from anywhere, and impossible for Serena to delete from the local system. My secret trigger was a line from an old blues song my Samuel used to sing whenever he was working in his woodshop, a phrase of hope against hard times. The sun's going to shine in my back door someday. It was a ghost from the past, a digital ghost I was programming to save my son's future. I finished just as I heard the garage door humming. Serena was home early. I frantically wiped down the tablet, removing any fingerprints, and slipped out of the office. my heart hammering against my ribs. I made it back to my room seconds before she walked down the hall. The trap was set. The digital ghost was waiting in the machine. Now, all I had to do was provoke the monster into a confession. I needed to shatter her perfect composure, to rattle her cage so hard that the mask would finally drop. And I knew exactly how to do it. My plan would have two parts. First, psychological warfare. Second, the final interrogation. She thought she was the puppet master, pulling my strings, pulling Mark's. She was about to find out what happens when the puppet cuts its own strings and picks up a knife. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was accompanied by something else. A grim, familiar determination. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The frightened old woman was gone. Detective Reed was back on the case, and she had a monster to catch. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I had to live inside the lie, playing the part of the defeated, slightly more confused than usual mother. Every meal with Serena was a masterclass in psychological torture. Her smiles were brighter, her words of concern more frequent. She was gloating, certain she had crushed my little rebellion. I let her believe it. I was meek. I was quiet. I let my shoulders slump. I was baiting the trap with my own apparent weakness. Inside, I was a coiled spring. I spent the time refining my plan, running through every possible contingency. The final confrontation had to be perfect. It had to be just me and her. Mark had to be out of the house. And I needed to provoke her so thoroughly that her confession would be an unstoppable torrent of arrogant rage. The first step was preparing the primary piece of psychological bait. The photograph of the olanzapine bottle on my burner phone was my bomb, but I needed a way to detonate it with maximum impact. That meant I needed a physical copy. Under the guise of a sentimental walk, I had Serena drop me at a local park. I told her the fresh air would do me good and that I'd call Mark for a ride in an hour. She agreed, likely happy to have the moping old woman out of her perfect house for a while. The moment her Tesla purred away, I walked 2 blocks to a 24-hour copy shop. The kid behind the counter didn't even blink as he printed a high-gloss 8x10 of the prescription bottle. The damning label was perfectly, horribly clear. I paid in cash and slipped the photo into a manila envelope. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the photograph in my lap, and I waited. This was it. The day she planned to have me committed. The day I would turn her world upside down. At 7 a.m., I heard the sound I was waiting for. The hiss of the shower starting in the master bathroom. Serena would be in there for at least 15 minutes, lost in steam and self-satisfaction. It was time. I moved like a shadow, down the hall, into the master suite. The sound of the water covered any noise I might make. The air was thick with the scent of expensive soap. My movements were swift and precise. On the pristine white towel warmer, a thick, fluffy bath towel was heating for the queen of the house. I took it off the rack. In its place, I taped the 8x10 photograph of the pill bottle directly to the center of the large, fog-free vanity mirror, right at her eye level. It would be the first thing she saw. Then, for the final touch, the one designed to look not like a detective's calculated move, but like the act of an unhinged mind, I reached for the tube of expensive, blood-red lipstick I'd seen on her vanity. I uncapped it. Directly below the photograph, I scrawled 2 words in a large, messy script, the script of a woman on the ragged edge. I know. I placed the lipstick on the counter, a single drop of crimson evidence. I stepped back, admired my work for a fraction of a second, and then slipped out of the room as silently as I had entered. The bait was laid. Next, I needed to get Mark out of the house. I went to the kitchen and started making coffee, the rich aroma a comforting anchor in the tense silence. I needed to create a scene of perfect domestic normalcy. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I was an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime. I called him on the house intercom, pitching my voice to be a little shaky, a little weak. "Mark, honey," I said, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I have a terrible craving for one of those almond croissants from that little French bakery you love, the one on Elm Street. Would you be a dear and go pick some up for us?" There was a groggy pause. "Sure, Mom," he finally said, his voice thick with medicated sleep. I'll go in a few minutes." Perfect. He would be gone for at least half an hour. Just enough time. A few minutes later, the shower in the master bathroom stopped. I heard the slide of the glass door. The silence that followed was a taut, stretched wire. I could picture the scene perfectly. Serena, wrapped in a towel, stepping into the steamy room, her mind on her victory, and then the frozen moment of discovery, the sight of the photograph, the two red words screaming at her from her own mirror. The silence was shattered by a sharp, strangled cry of pure rage. Then, the sound of something shattering against the wall. The lipstick tube, I imagined. I heard a string of vicious, ugly curses, words I had never heard her utter in her perfect, honeyed voice. Her footsteps, no longer a graceful glide, but the heavy, furious stomps of a cornered animal, thundered down the hallway toward the kitchen. She burst into the room, her face a terrifying mask of fury. Her beautiful, composed features were twisted with hate. She was wearing a silk robe, hastily thrown on, her wet hair plastered to her skull. The perfect angel was gone. In her place was a monster. "You meddling old fool!" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous snarl. She stalked toward me, her hands clenched into fists. "What have you done?" I turned from the coffee maker, my expression one of carefully crafted, fearful confusion. This was the moment. The performance had to be flawless. "Serena, dear, what is it?" I asked, my voice trembling just enough. "You frighten me." "Don't you play dumb with me," she spat, her eyes burning with a cold black fire. "The picture, the note. What is it you think you know?" I let my gaze drop to the floor as if in shame, as if I were a child caught in a lie. I had to make her feel powerful. I had to make her feel so superior that she would have no reason to hold back. "I overheard you, Serena," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "On the phone with Leo. I know about the medication. I know about the plan to have me committed today." I took a shaky breath. "And I know you plan to get rid of Mark." As I spoke, as I laid out my knowledge in the meekest voice I could muster, I subtly, almost imperceptibly, wove in my secret voice command. My words were a shield, a cover for the real action. My apparent confusion was the trigger. "It's such a shame," I said, my voice full of a non sequitur meant to sound like the ramblings of a fractured mind. "After all this, I just hope the sun's going to shine in my back door someday." In the corner of the kitchen, on the sleek smart hub mounted on the wall, a tiny, almost invisible blue light blinked once. The recording was live, and the monster was about to give her final damning performance. My apparent weakness was the final catalyst she needed. Believing she was in a simple battle of wills with a senile old woman who had stumbled onto a piece of a puzzle she couldn't possibly comprehend, Serena dropped her facade completely. All the pent-up rage, all the arrogance of a predator who believed she was closing in for the kill, came pouring out. She laughed. It was a sound I will never forget, a cold, cruel, and utterly mirthless sound that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. "You know?" she sneered, taking a step closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "You don't know anything. You're a confused old woman with a photograph. Do you have any idea how easy it is to fake a prescription label online? You have nothing." She began to pace the kitchen, a caged tiger exulting in her own power. Her every word was a nail in her own coffin. Her every admission, captured in high-definition video and audio by the silent watching eye on the wall. "Let me tell you what's really going to happen today, Evie," she said, her voice a venomous purr. "In about an hour, a lovely doctor from a very exclusive private facility is going to arrive. I called him last night. I told him you'd become violent and paranoid, that you were making wild accusations and destroying property." She gestured vaguely in the direction of her bathroom. "Your little stunt this morning? It's the perfect confirmation. You're the star witness for your own committal." My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic bird trapped behind my ribs. But I kept my face a mask of terrified confusion. I had to let her empty the clip. "And Mark?" she continued, her eyes glittering with a sociopathic pride that made my skin crawl. "Oh, my dear, sweet, confused Mark is a mess. I've spent months carefully cultivating this narrative. His partners at the firm, his friends, his own therapist. They all think he's on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown. They've been getting worried, tearful calls from his loving, terrified wife for months." She stopped pacing and leaned in close, her face inches from mine, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "So when he finds out what you've done today, when he starts screaming about you being paranoid, about you trying to frame me with fake pictures, who do you think they'll believe? They'll see a tragic textbook case of a woman who has lost her mind, pushing her already fragile son over the edge." She stood back up, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. "He'll be committed too. For his own safety, of course. A different facility, much nicer than yours. And once you're both gone, tucked away safely where you can't manage your own affairs, his loving wife will have full power of attorney over the entire estate." She paused for effect, savoring her victory. "And then, a tragic accident. An overdose of his prescribed antidepressants, perhaps. A terrible, unforeseen complication. Everyone will mourn. Everyone will pity the poor, beautiful widow who lost everything. And Leo and I will have a very, very comfortable life on your son's fortune. It's the perfect plan." She let out a soft, satisfied sigh. "And you stupid old woman, you can't do a single thing to stop it." She had laid it all out. The entire monstrous, diabolical plan, delivered with the arrogant pride of a master criminal. She was so sure of her own brilliance, so convinced of my weakness, that she had just delivered a full, signed confession to a hidden camera. I let her finish. I let the last of her venomous words hang in the air like poison gas. I looked at her, at the monster my son had married. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. "You're right," I said. My voice was suddenly clear and steady. All traces of fear and confusion were gone, stripped away to reveal the cold, hard steel beneath. "A few minutes ago, I didn't have any real proof." I paused, holding her gaze as her triumphant expression began to falter, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "But I do now." The confusion on her face was exquisite. She didn't understand. She couldn't comprehend that the game had changed. I looked past her to the smart hub on the wall. My voice was crisp, clear, and full of the authority I hadn't used in years. "Computer." The pleasant, automated female voice of the smart home replied instantly. "How can I help you?" Serena's eyes widened. She finally looked at the smart hub, as if seeing it for the first time. "End recording," I commanded. "Save file under the name Serena's Confession. Send that file immediately to Mark Reed and to my emergency contact, Detective Maya Cruz, at her secure police email address." "Action complete," the automated voice chirped. "Files sent." The color, the life, the arrogant certainty drained from Serena's face. It was a slow, horrifying dawning, the look of a master chess player who has just realized they've been led into a trap and have been in checkmate for the last 5 moves. Her eyes darted from my face to the smart hub, the tiny blue light now off. She understood. Her perfect private confession had just been broadcast to the 2 people in the world who could destroy her. At that exact moment, 2 sounds occurred simultaneously. The first was the gentle hum of the garage door opening. Mark was home with the pastries. His phone, I knew, would be chiming with a notification for a new, very large video file. The second sound was a distant but rapidly approaching siren. My old friend and colleague, Detective Maya Cruz, was a woman who took emergency contacts very, very seriously. The trap had been sprung, and the walls of the cage she had so carefully built for my son and me had just slammed shut on her. For a single paralyzed second, Serena stood frozen in the center of the kitchen. The entire universe seemed to shrink down to the space between us, a vibrating, silent battlefield where the war had already been lost and won. The approaching siren was a rising scream, the soundtrack to her world collapsing. Then, her survival instinct, the primal core of the predator, took over. Her face, which had been a mask of shocked disbelief, twisted into a snarl of pure feral rage. It wasn't directed at me anymore. It was directed at the trap, at the walls, at the fate that was screaming down the suburban street toward her. She whirled around and made a desperate, frantic run for the back door, for the sprawling, manicured lawn that led to the woods beyond. The grieving widow, the triumphant heiress, the brilliant manipulator. It was all gone. All that was left was a common criminal fleeing the scene of a crime. I didn't move. I just stood by the coffee maker, my heart a steady, heavy drum in my chest. I listened to the sound of her feet slipping on the wet flagstones of the patio, the sound of Mark's car door slamming in the driveway, and the siren growing impossibly loud, resolving into the distinct wail of 2 separate police cruisers. The back door slammed shut behind her. A moment later, the front door burst open. It was Mark, his face pale and slack with confusion, a white paper bag of pastries clutched in his hand. "Mom, what's going on? I heard sirens." His phone buzzed in his other hand. He glanced down at it. I saw the notification on his screen. New video file from Home Hub. His eyes lifted to mine, a question in them. Before I could answer, 2 uniformed officers filled the doorway behind him, their expressions grim and professional. And behind them, a figure in a sharp black pantsuit, her face a familiar, welcome sight of no-nonsense authority. "Evie," Detective Maya Cruz said, her eyes sweeping the room and landing on me. Her gaze was a mixture of deep concern and professional assessment. "You want to tell me what the hell is going on?" "She confessed, Maya," I said, my voice quiet, but caring in the sudden silence. "It's all on the recording. I just sent it to you." Mark was staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over the play button. He looked from the phone to me, then to Maya, the chemical fog in his mind warring with the undeniable reality of police officers in his kitchen. "What recording?" he mumbled. "Mom, what did you do?" "Show him," I said to Maya. Maya nodded at one of the officers. "Secure the perimeter. The suspect is female, named Serena Reed. She may have fled through the rear of the house." To the other officer, she said, "Stay with them." She walked toward us, pulling out her own phone. "I got the file, Evie, a minute ago." She turned the screen to Mark. "Mr. Reed, I'm Detective Cruz. Your mother is a very old friend of mine. I think you need to watch this. Now." She pressed play. The sound that filled the sterile, white kitchen was Serena's voice. Not the honeyed, gentle voice Mark knew, but the cold, venomous snarl I had heard. "Let me tell you what's really going to happen today, Evie." I watched my son's face as he listened. I saw the confusion give way to disbelief. the disbelief to a dawning, sickening horror. The color drained from his cheeks. The pastry bag slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor, scattering almond croissants across the pristine marble. His body began to tremble, not from the drugs, but from the brutal clarifying shock of the truth. He heard her call him sweet and confused. He heard her detail the months of manipulation, the lies she told his partners and friends. He heard her plan to have him committed. And then he heard the final devastating blow. And then a tragic accident. An overdose of his prescribed medication. Leo and I will have a very, very comfortable life on your son's fortune. The video ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any sound. Mark lifted his head. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw my son. The fog was gone, burned away by the terrible fiery truth. His eyes were clear, and they were filled with a dawning, shattering understanding of what she had done to him and what I had done for him. The danger I had faced, alone, in his own home. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. It was a universe of apology and gratitude and horror, all in one word. Just then, the officer's radio crackled to life. Suspect apprehended at the rear fence line. We have her in custody. It was over. The cage door had slammed shut. The aftermath was a maelstrom of flashing lights, sober-faced detectives, and the quiet, efficient dismantling of Serena's world. She was brought back through the house in handcuffs, a snarling, terrified animal deprived of her finery. She saw me standing with Mark and lunged, a scream of pure hatred tearing from her throat before the officers restrained her. Her accomplice, Leo, a slick investment banker who had been funneling Mark's money into offshore accounts for Serena, was picked up an hour later at his downtown office. He folded the moment he was shown the video. But the real work was just beginning. The legal case would be simple. The human one was a wreckage. Mark sat at the kitchen table, staring at the scattered pastries on the floor as if they were pieces of his shattered life. The chemical straitjacket was gone, but the wounds it had inflicted were deep and raw. He had to confront the reality that his mind, his greatest asset, had been methodically hijacked. He had to grieve for the woman he thought he had married, a woman who had never truly existed. It was a long, dark road. But as I sat down beside him and placed my hand on his, I knew he wouldn't have to walk it alone. The detective's work was done. The mother's had just begun. The months that followed were a slow, painful reconstruction. The legal case against Serena and Leo was swift and decisive. The digital confession, a perfect, undeniable artifact of her own making, was the centerpiece of a mountain of evidence the police quickly uncovered. Financial records, prescription histories, testimony from the crooked Dr. Cole, who had provided the drugs. It was an open and shut case. They turned on each other immediately, their sociopathic partnership dissolving into a messy flurry of accusations and blame. They were both facing long prison sentences. The fortune they were willing to kill for was secure. But the real healing had nothing to do with courtrooms or bank accounts. It had to do with the quiet, difficult work of detoxing a man's body and soul. The withdrawal from the olanzapine was a brutal ordeal for Mark. There were nights of sweats and tremors, days of crushing fatigue and depression. He had to learn to trust his own thoughts again, to separate the echoes of Serena's gaslighting from the truth of his own mind. I didn't go back to the Midwest. I sold my condo and moved permanently, not into the gilded cage, but into a small, sunny apartment a few miles away. That house, once a place of terror, needed to be cleansed. Together, Mark and I began the process of reclaiming it. We hired a new designer, not to create a minimalist showpiece, but a home. We tore out the cold marble and put in warm hardwood floors. We painted the stark white walls in shades of cream and blue. We filled the silent, empty rooms with comfortable furniture, shelves of books, and the sound of jazz music. We reprogrammed the smart home system from top to bottom. The pleasant female voice that had once recorded Serena's downfall was now used to play Miles Davis and look up recipes for my spaghetti sauce. Our relationship, which had been strained and twisted by Serena's manipulations, was reforged in the fire of that terrible time. The condescending concern in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, profound respect. He saw me not as an aging mother to be managed, but as the woman who had saved his life. And I saw him not as a victim, but as a survivor, a man strong enough to face the ugliest of truths and begin the hard work of putting himself back together. He went back to work, at first just for a few hours a day. His partners, horrified and deeply apologetic for having been so thoroughly deceived, welcomed him back with open arms. The fog was gone, and the brilliant architectural mind that Serena had tried to smother began to spark and glow once more. One evening, about 6 months after Serena's arrest, we were sitting on his now peaceful patio. The scent of jasmine hung in the warm evening air. The smart home, once my weapon, was now just a convenience, playing a soft John Coltrane tune in the background. I had been teaching him how to play poker, an old trick from my detective days for learning how to read a person's tells, the unconscious signals of deception that people leak when they're bluffing. He looked at the cards in his hand, then at me, a small sad smile playing on his lips. "You know, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but clear, the clearest it had been in over a year. "I think I'm finally starting to see it. The little flicker of the eye. The way someone holds their breath just before they tell a lie." I smiled back, a genuine warm smile that reached my eyes. "It's all about observation, honey," I said. "It's about seeing what's really there, not just what you want to see." He nodded slowly, a world of painful understanding in that simple gesture. He had wanted to see a loving, perfect wife, and that desire had almost cost him his life. He placed his cards on the table. He had a winning hand, a full house. He didn't seem to care about the game. He just looked at me, his eyes clear and full of a love and a gratitude that needed no words. He was healing. He was safe. He was my son again. And I, Evelyn Reed, the retired detective, the mother, the survivor, had closed the most important case of my life. I looked out at the setting sun, a brilliant splash of orange and gold against the darkening sky. The old blues lyric, the trigger for my digital trap, came back to me, no longer a desperate hope, but a simple, peaceful fact. The sun was finally shining in my back door, and it was here to stay. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.